What if we weren't the first? Not the first to build, not the first to explore the stars, and not the first to feel invincible. They left behind ruins scattered across the world that no one seems to remember, monuments that shouldn't exist, structures far too advanced for their time and forgotten for ours. Without metal, without computers, without wheels. They built as though someone had shown them how, someone highly advanced. Then they disappeared, but their secrets remained, along with the questions. Who built them? Why did they vanish? And most importantly, what did we forget with them? 5 sites, thousands of questions. Let's go on a journey to uncover at least some of the answers. The mysteries of ancient civilizations. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It will help us and YouTube's algorithms understand what topics you like more, and we'll do more content like this. It is probably the most mysterious, strange, and incomprehensible island on Earth. Lost in the vast waters of the Pacific Ocean, it strikes the imagination with its monumental statues that have stood there for centuries, like eternal guardians of a mysterious past. When the first European travelers set foot on its shores, they discovered hundreds and hundreds of these stone giants. Some are as tall as a 7-story building and weigh almost 100 tons. That is Easter Island. We will consider 3 mysteries of this island which interest everyone, and at the end, we will reveal the main secret, which for some reason almost no one talks about. Today, you're going to find out what is hiding under the layer of earth at the stone heads. Where did these giant multi-ton statues on the island come from? Who is behind their creation? And what is the real mystery of Easter Island, which is little talked about? The real mystery of Easter Island. Mystery 1. What is wrong with the island? And what happened to the people who live on it? A single look at Easter Island on a large scale is enough to raise this question. And as we think about it, we realize that it is not easy to find a clear and convincing answer. Judge for yourself. It's a triangular-shaped island. It is quite small, 24.6 kilometers, 15.3 miles long, and 12.3 kilometers, 7.6 miles at its widest point. That's a bit small for the birth of an entire civilization. But that's not the point. Look at where it is. It's an enormous distance from the mainland. It's 3,512 kilometers, 2,182 miles to the coast of Chile, the country to which the island belongs. That's a 4-hour flight in a modern passenger jet. What about the other side? It's the same. The nearest landmass, the Pitcairn Islands, is 1,931 kilometers, 1,200 miles away. There's nothing to say about the north and the south. It's just a vast ocean. Such distances were traveled with great difficulty by Europeans when they discovered America. And how did the first inhabitants of the island get to this island in the pre-Columbian times? And most importantly, why? What was so special about this tiny island that settlers rushed to it? What we see on it now is almost a desert. Such a huge discrepancy, of course, gave rise to many fantastic versions. What is the first thing that comes to mind if you imagine yourself for a minute a follower of so-called alternative history? Well, of course, Atlantis. It's gone underwater, and Easter Island is its remaining shard, and there are still people trapped in it. It all fits, except there's one little discrepancy. According to the legend, the mythical Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean. Easter Island is in the Pacific. But the Romantics have a quick and weighty, in their opinion, argument. They say the Pacific Ocean once had its own version of Atlantis, a sunken continent called Mu. Yeah, just like that, Mu, or Mu Land. However, such a strange name was given to it as early as in the 19th century. The French historian and ethnographer Charles-Étienne Brasseur de Bourbourg and the American archaeologist Augustus Le Plongeon had a hand in it. But recall that human imagination has given each of the Earth's oceans its sunken continent. You know two, and add Lemuria in the Indian Ocean and Arctida Hyperborea in the Arctic Ocean. But those are fairy tales. But seriously, where did an island come from in the middle of the ocean? The same reason why a lot of other remote islands were formed, because of underwater volcanoes. But don't be disappointed, because it all depends on your point of view, literally and figuratively. Easter Island is the top of a whole huge volcanic highland. These craters on the island are impressive in their own right, especially if viewed from a bird's-eye view. But what's down there? If you remove the ocean, it turns out the island is the crater of a giant volcano with a height from the bottom of more than 3,000 meters, about 10,000 feet. That is approximately the height of the volcano Etna in Italy, or familiar to all, Fujiyama in Japan. Everything is very similar here, only the volcano is broader and more massive. You can compare it with Kilimanjaro. There, on the top, there is also enough to accommodate several settlements. Well, the origin of the island itself is not in doubt, and people did not stay on it after the flooding of the mythical continent, but somehow got there by themselves. The question is, how? And from where? To understand everything well, we should ask ourselves a question. When was the first time any Europeans sailed to this island and could return to report its existence? We do not know exactly when Europeans first reached Easter Island. It is very possible that in the 16th to 17th centuries, some seafarers came across this piece of land, but did not pay much attention to it or tell much about it. The recorded appearance of Europeans here took place on April 5th, 1722, when an expedition led by Dutch traveler Jacob Roggeveen saw this shore and approached it. They left for history the first evidence of the existence on the island of surprisingly friendly islanders and strange, huge statues. That's when the island got its name. Roggeveen had a habit of naming islands by dates and events that happened or were somehow connected to the time of discovery. So, since the island was discovered on Easter, he named it Easter Island, although the locals call it Rapa Nui. However, the visit was very brief and ended tragically for the navigators and many islanders. Yes, that first encounter was pretty bloody, but its details add to the mysteries of the Eastern Island civilization. Here's what happened there. The sailors were overjoyed when they saw the island, for they thought it was the continent they had been looking for so long. In ancient times in the Middle Ages, geographers guessed that somewhere south of the equator there must be an entire undiscovered continent waiting for its discoverers. In 1722, a small fleet of Admiral Jacob Roggeveen set out to find it. But getting to the island was not so easy. The ships cruised for 3 days along the northern coast, waiting out the strong surf that prevented them from landing on the shore. The boats were lowered only 5 days later, April 10th, and about 1,500 discoverers landed on the island. Here is how the first meeting with the locals was described by a participant of these events, Karl Friedrich Behrens, a sailor and soldier from Mecklenburg in present-day Germany, who served as a corporal on the ship Roggeveen. The natives swam off in the water in thousands. Some with small dinghies or skiffs brought us uncooked and baked hens together with many roots. While on the beach, they were running up and down like deer. It would seem that what could go wrong with such a friendly attitude from the locals? But here's what happens next from Baron's words. By some misadventure, one of the natives who were on board the vessels got shot, and this must have caused a great consternation among them, for they all immediately sprang into the water, and some swam away towards the shore, but others made off in their skiffs with all possible haste. We then, with 150 men, soldiers as well as seamen, proceeded in the name of God ashore, and among them there was present our admiral himself, by whom I was given command of a section of the party. I was the first who, at the disembarkation, set foot on the island. The inhabitants pressed round us in such crowds that we could scarcely pass along, so that we had to force a way through them. And because some of them went so far as to lay hold of our arms, weapons, they were fired upon, by which they were direly alarmed and dispersed, but collected again in swarms, though keeping some 10 paces in front of us, believing that they were already out of range of our weapons at that distance. Many of them were shot at this juncture, and among the slain lay the man who had been with us before, at which we were much grieved. In order to obtain possession of the bodies, they congregated in great numbers, bringing with them presents of various kinds of fruits and vegetables, in order that we might the more readily surrender to them their slain. The consternation of these people was by no means abated. Even their children's children in that place will in times to come be able to recount the story of it. They kept up an uncommon yelling. Women as well as children brought palm branches, red and white streamers, and various kinds of fruits, Indian figs, large nuts, sugar cane, roots, fowls, alive, boiled, and roast. They even flung themselves at our feet, displayed the streamers in front of us, and prostrated themselves on their knees before us, presenting their palm branches as peace offerings. They also made tender of their womankind, asking whether we would accompany them to their huts or had rather take them off to the ships. However, we did them no ill, but made a present to them of a piece of gaily colored linen print between 50 and 60 ells in length, which they measured fathom-wise more than 100 times over. We also distributed coral baubles, small mirrors, etc., by which they might be assured that we were their friends. These heartbreaking descriptions bring a lump to the throat and tears to the eyes. That's what first contact can be like, and we still dream of making contact with aliens. Further, Barons will more than once say how he was stunned by the friendliness of the natives, even though they, the invaders, killed several dozen locals in the course of this, so to speak, acquaintance. The landing was also a tragedy for Roggeveen's flotilla. One ship sank in rough waters. The expedition lost about half of its men, and the island itself turned out to be a disappointment because they were looking for a whole continent. More details about the island were told by the famous Captain Cook, who appeared here half a century later in 1774. Unfortunately, he was not there very long either. Otherwise, of course, we would have received much invaluable information. And further, the islanders were left to their own devices for a while. As we see, even the most powerful in the world at that time, European civilization, with its thirst for the discovery of new lands, was able to visit this island only twice in half a century, and that with huge problems. And again, we have to return to the following question. How did people get to Easter Island? Those very first people who created a whole original civilization. Many generations of archaeologists, historians, and anthropologists have puzzled over this question. The legendary Norwegian archaeologist and traveler Thor Heyerdahl did much work in this direction. His theory, which he adhered to all his life, was that the inhabitants of South America traveled westward on their rafts from the continent. To personally prove this by example, Heyerdahl made his astounding journey on a Kon-Tiki raft with 5 other heroes like himself. He wrote a fascinating book about it, the Kon-Tiki Voyage, in which he convincingly proved his theory. Then, Heyerdahl lived almost a year on Easter Island and wrote another no less marvelous book called Aku Aku. The book became a world bestseller. The author collected a lot of facts that seemed to him to substantiate his theory. These are the same plants that grow in America. The similarity of statues with statues of pre-Columbian American civilizations, and much more. But to the great regret of fans of this undoubtedly outstanding man, his theory was later literally trashed by other scientists. To date, most hold to the idea that it was exactly the opposite. People came to Easter Island from the west, and they were Polynesians. In favor of this version speaks many more facts, direct and indirect, and it is less contradictory. After all, it is reliably known that the Polynesians are great navigators. They even developed their navigation system from scratch, which they used for thousands of years to ensure long voyages of thousands of kilometers across the open Pacific Ocean. The Polynesians made contact with almost every island within the vast Polynesian Triangle, using outrigger or double-hulled canoes. Great distances were always a starting point for them, not a challenge. You only have to look at those scatterings of inhabited small islands in the Pacific to realize that. But there's another point here. Didn't you think something was missing in this story of the scientific search for an answer to where island humans came from? One technical detail. Here's a clue. Wouldn't it have been easier to ask the people of Easter Island where they came from? That is where a lot of people will have a pattern break. Those who have never personally studied the topic of Easter Island mostly know about it from pictures like this. That is, stone statues, and not a soul around. Involuntarily takes root the opinion that the island is uninhabited and only tourists and scientists visit it. But in fact, the island is quite inhabited, and we'll be back to this issue. Promise. You will witness amazing discoveries. So the inhabitants of Easter Island said that their great ancestor, Hotu Matua, came on several huge boats with his friends, family, animals, and seeds for future crops. He came from the west, from the island which the inhabitants of Easter Island called Hiva, and he sailed all the time towards the sunrise, that is, towards the east. Here, however, an exciting thing arises at once. In one of the versions of these stories and legends, it turns out that when Hotu Matua, with the whole crowd of attendants, sailed here on the island, his brother was already waiting for him. Yep, his brother. So it turns out that his brother had traveled here earlier, and Hotu Matua knew where he was going, not just decided to go into the unknown. We know that in the Marquesas Islands, there are several islands whose name includes the word Hiva, so this version fits nicely into the Western hypothesis of the origin of the natives of Easter Island. Well, on the first mystery, the scientists still have some kind of agreement, albeit shaky, but agreement. But what about the second? Mystery 2. Statues. Well, whoever the creators of these legendary statues were, and wherever they came from, we know next to nothing about them. Those people are long gone, but the statues remained, and there are many more questions with them than might at first appear. How did the natives make them? And how did they move these blocks? Why are there so many of them? Why were they made in the first place? And why are they so strange? Especially that last point. All these statues are really strange. There is something about them not quite earthly. Many people have had these thoughts, and many pseudoscientific theories have developed based on them. We will now clarify what can be clarified, and will not devalue what scientists have not been able to clarify yet. First, let's clarify the scale of the phenomenon. Let us remind you that if you were not specifically interested in the topic, you have most likely seen this group of statues and a couple of other beautiful angles where only stone heads stick out of the ground. In many ways, these heads have become an even more recognizable symbol of Easter Island than the full-size statues. And even a myth arose that this is how all the statues on the island look. And some sources presented the recent excavations that revealed the torsos of the statues as some sensation. Indeed, the footage from the excavation site may lead to such thoughts for many who have just begun to take an interest in the topic. But it's much more prosaic than that. The excavations have been going on for years. The work was led by renowned archaeologist Joanne van Tilburg, who is widely regarded as one of the world's leading experts on Easter Island statues. Working closely with the Easter Island community, the scientist compiled a list, description, and catalog of all the statues on the island. So, according to the researcher herself, the notion that the statues of Easter Island have only heads is because recognizable photographs most often capture only 150 sculptures, the same ones buried in the ground at the shoulders or neck. But nobody buried them on purpose. Standing on a rather steep slope, they have sunk underground naturally over hundreds of years. They were covered with soil during the rains year after year, century after century. Scientists do not doubt that. However, the phenomenon is not limited to these 150 heads. In fact, there are many more statues there, about 900. As of 2024, they are still occasionally discovered, so the number is getting close to 1,000. Only if they were small, but they certainly don't look like garden gnomes. These stone monoliths are in some cases giant. One of the unfinished sculptures, if completed, would be 21 meters, 69 feet tall, weighing about 150 tons. 21 meters is the level of the 7th floor of an apartment building, and the weight of 150 tons is 3 Boeing 737s loaded to the brim with passengers and luggage. Of course, not all moai, as these statues are called in the local language, are such giants. Most are smaller. The average height is 4 meters. But still, the weight of even the smallest goes to tons, and the average is dozens of tons. Their making was very labor-intensive. Experienced artisans spent much time carving the statues with simple chisels made of obsidian volcanic glass. A team of 6 people worked on one statue for a whole year. Scientists managed to figure out these details from indirect evidence by performing complex calculations. Why do weight and size matter so much and raise so many questions? Because the moai were placed around the island as if they were meant to protect it from invaders. And somehow they were moved to these places over great distances. How? How is this possible without modern cranes? The question is compounded by the fact that moai were first made by working stone boulders. Only then the finished statues were transported in some unknown way to the installation site. That is well known because the place of production of moai is not a secret. It was clear as soon as the island began to be explored. The vast majority of the moai, 834 statues, or about 95%, were cut in the quarry of the Rano Raraku volcano here on the island. There were, and still are, giant deposits of tacolite tuff. This is a volcanic rock that, unlike basalt, is much looser and easier to handle. There are also basalt moai, but they are in the minority for obvious reasons. The rock is too hard. One of the well-preserved moai is now in the British Museum. So back to the transportation problem. For a long time, it was unclear. How is it possible to drag a giant stone statue several kilometers without a tractor and without damaging it? Here, the attentive viewer will ask a reasonable question. Wouldn't it have been simpler to drag the boulder workpiece to the installation site of the future statue first and only then start hewing it out? After all, you can drag the stones without fear of cracking the statue and wasting long, hard labor. That is a great question, and it was raised by researchers. But they did not find the answer. The natives of Easter Island were hardly clueless, so the scientists decided that it had some sacred meaning, and the question hung in the air. But the main question remained: how were these statues dragged across the island? There were many assumptions, sometimes absolutely fantastic. Well, really, the situation is almost fantastic. Some researchers believe that they were moved horizontally. They made wooden skids, put the statue on them, and dragged it further. It was also assumed that under the skids they made a wood planking, and it greatly facilitated the work. But there was also a version that the statues were moved in an upright position. It was indicated by many obvious signs. At least the fact that already in the quarry, some of them were raised vertically. Here again, we can think about whether to take the simple way and ask the locals how it really was. And this is almost the first thing that came to the mind of Thor Heyerdahl, who was very friendly with the islanders. Only the answer disappointed him a little bit. The locals said that the statues just walked by themselves. Yes, they just walked to where they needed to go. The answer could have been taken as a joke by some local funny man, but then it turned out that many islanders thought so seriously. And then Heyerdahl thought, maybe the locals are not so wrong. No, of course, he did not believe in the magic version. But he assumed that by wrapping one rope around the head of the statue and another around the base, the islanders could walk the moai forward by swiveling and rocking it from side to side. These movements are roughly similar to the ones we use to move a refrigerator when we alternatively move each side a few centimeters. It is necessary to tilt it to one side and forward so that it rests on the floor only in one corner, to turn it horizontally in the required direction, to put it on one side, and to repeat so until the refrigerator goes where it should stand. Using this method, an experienced team could move the statue about 650 feet daily. Thor Heyerdahl and Czech engineer Pavel decided to pull the same trick with the moai statue, or rather, with its concrete model. You've probably guessed by now that they succeeded. Later, many people conducted such experiments. All you need is 3 strong ropes and a couple dozen people, also strong, and the statue walks on. These experiments pretty much put an end to the how debate. But there are still questions of why, because let's not forget, those statues are very strange. For a long time, it was believed that the statues of Easter Island were eyeless. Indeed, they have specific empty eye sockets. At first, it was explained by some superstitions and prejudices. After all, eyes in many cultures are something special in the human body. And in our modern culture too, the eyes have a special meaning. Not without reason, they say that the eyes are the mirror of the soul. In some cultures, even children's dolls were made without eyes because it was believed that if you draw or add eyes to the doll, it could come to life and get a soul. Not much of a toy, to put it bluntly. So the idea was that the moai were eyeless for some reason. This theory existed until archaeologists discovered strange, roundish-shaped pieces of coral near the statues during excavations. The Belgian archaeologist Henri Lavacherie was the first to notice them, but nothing indicated to him that they could have anything to do with eyes. Corals were often used to polish the carved stone surface and smooth statues. And the same Thor Heyerdahl guessed their purpose. In 1955, he was the first to make this assumption. And he was right. It turned out that the natives made the statue's eyes of white coral, and black pupils served as pieces of obsidian. By the way, on modern photos of statues with eyes, it's not that it's completely new, but still a restoration. The eyes that fell out of some statues were put back in by hand. large stone hats on the heads of some statues raise separate questions. They are called pukao in the local language. It feels as if they are specially painted in a reddish color. In fact, they were originally made of a different material, light red volcanic slag, which was mined in a single place in the southwestern part of the island. Why were these caps needed? No one knows for sure. There are only versions. What is known for sure is that the pukao did not appear at the same time as the statues themselves. They were put on their heads in the 15th to 16th centuries, tens or even hundreds of years after the statues were made. And characteristically, not all of them, but only some. And there is a rather convincing version which fits well with what the statues symbolize generally. Finally, we have reached, if not the main question, then at least one of the most interesting. Who or what do these statues represent? And why did the ancient islanders produce them in such quantities? Have you noticed that the statues are different in size and in physique and facial features? One of the most convincing versions says that they are not just faceless stone statues, but are somehow connected with the ancestors of the Rapa Nui people. And that sounds fascinating, with quite specific ancestors. Probably each moai statue is a stone incarnation of a dead ancestor. It could be a very specific ancestor with a name, a family, some life of his own, and of course, his characteristic appearance. It is astonishing, but who knows? Perhaps on Easter Island, we see about 1,000 monuments of once-lived real people. They made statues of their ancestors and worshipped them for exactly the same reason that many other cultures did. And this point intersects with the question of, why is it necessary to put red pukao hats on some statues? Apparently, some ancestors somehow distinguished themselves in a specific way after their death, already being a stone statue. After all, remember, pukao were put on the statues many, many years after the statues were made. Perhaps those ancestors listened to the prayers and granted a fruitful year or some other blessings for which they were honored with such symbolic gratitude. But the ancestors were not always favorable. And one day, something happened on the island that, for such a closed ecosystem, can be considered the real end of the world without exaggeration. And it has eerie parallels with our entire planet and humanity. Mystery 3. Where did everything disappear to? You probably haven't noticed another oddity in our story. It's really unnoticeable. Remember when we talked about the transportation versions of the statues? There was a version with wooden skids and a wooden deck. Well, look at this. Do you see any wood here? Indeed, if you look at the island from a bird's eye view, you can see that there are not many trees on it, to put it bluntly. Not that there are no trees at all, but most have been planted already nowadays. And in the past, the island was indeed like a golf course. So why do researchers believe that statues were moved on wooden skids and decks? After all, given the number of statues and the rapid deterioration of wood, the wood consumption would have to be on an industrial scale. Or maybe there were forests on Easter Island once. But where did they go in that case? Stay to the end and find out this real mystery of Easter Island. Scientists directly or indirectly link these questions to another Easter Island oddity not often discussed. The question is not only how and why people made and moved these huge statues. The question is also why they stopped doing it. With the help of radiocarbon dating, experts could find out that statues started appearing on the island around 1250 AD. And then the process suddenly stopped around 1500 or so. The creators of the statues simply left their stone chisels where they had last used them, and only a quarter of all the statues were installed where they were planned. Half were left in the quarry, while others were abandoned halfway through. The process stopped so suddenly that there's still no clear explanation. It looks like a plug was pulled out of the socket, a remote control was flicked on, and everything was turned off. Those are the associations that come to mind. And of course, it throws wood into the fire of fans of alternative history that includes aliens with their paleo contact. Admittedly, this is a case where a truly rational explanation is hard to find, and there is still no consensus as to why it happened so dramatically. But there is a very plausible version, which we will summarize at the end of the video. As for not versions, but just the facts themselves, the following picture emerges. When the first expedition of Europeans led by Jacob Roggeveen arrived at Easter Island in 1722, the natives only worshipped the statues, but did not make them. They hadn't made them for 200 years. And when the famous James Cook sailed here half a century later in 1774, he was met with a grim picture. This once prosperous island was in disrepair. Most of the fields were abandoned, and those that were still under cultivation yielded a meager harvest. The locals were in poverty, and most of the statues lay on the ground. In just 50 years, even those remnants of the amazing, very strange and mysterious civilization that Roggeveen had found had become a handful of hungry, miserable people. Even their stone gods lay down defeated. There is a theory as to why the Moai statues were thrown from their pedestals. Probably the inhabitants continuously suffered new misfortunes, crop failures, disappearance of arable land, wars, and feuds. All this, sooner or later, led them to bitter disappointment in their deified ancestors, who could not or would not help them. In anger, despair, and bitter resentment, the Rapa Nui pushed the statues down and even gouged out their coral obsidian eyes. The saddest part is that it didn't help them anymore. The next generations of islanders faced new hardships. What happened to people next? It didn't get any easier in the 19th century. The slave trade was still thriving, and greedy traders had made their way to this remote island. The local population was subjected to literally devastating raids from the continent. In 1862, the island was attacked by Peruvian slave traders who captured and drove 900 people to mine guano in the Atacama Desert, including the last Ariki king. Guano is the naturally decomposed remains of seabird droppings. In those times, it served as a valuable nitrogen-phosphorus fertilizer and raw material for manufacturing gunpowder and TNT. Slave labor kept the cost of extraction to a minimum. Sometime later, another 300 inhabitants were captured and taken to the island of Tahiti to work on plantations. Not only the natives of Easter Island, but even the missionaries who lived there fled from the subsequent invasion of inhuman profiteers. They all fled in despair to the Gambier archipelago stretching west of the island. The loss of population was devastating. In the short period of time between 1862 and 1877, the number of inhabitants of the island fell from 2,500 to 111. As we said at the beginning of the video, Easter Island is by no means uninhabited these days. According to the 2017 census, about 7,700 people live on it. And surprisingly, about half of them are descendants of those very same Rapa Nui people. Yes, that's right. Although you can't call it a happy ending, the Rapa Nui people have not disappeared without a trace, but continue to live. These people live ordinary, modern lives like other peoples of South America. And that's a good thing rather than a bad thing. After all, their ancestors survived a localized but very real end of the world. And that, you know, is no joke. But what happened to the trees after all? Epilogue. The real mystery of Easter Island. The famous traveler Jean-Francois Lapérouse, who reached the island in 1786, saw the devastation and decay and came up with some theories about what happened there. He speculated about it in his notes and mentioned trees which the inhabitants had the imprudence to cut down in very ancient times. According to Lapérouse, the sloppiness and mismanagement of the population was the cause of the island's decline. And there is every reason to believe that Lapérouse was right in his ruthless but accurate assessment of the short-sighted and irresponsibility of the ancient inhabitants of Easter Island. Modern archaeologists have found a lot of evidence that the Rapa Nui really destroyed their own habitat with their hands. In the heyday of the civilization, Easter Island was covered with a dense forest of trees and palm trees. But generation after generation, the indigenous people gradually destroyed it. It can be partly explained by survival motives. The forests were cut down for arable land. The wood was used as building material for dwellings and boats, or for transporting statues at best. But why at best? Was there a worst case? Yes, it was. Apparently, the islanders simply burned a huge amount of wood. Archaeologists have found a layer of ash and charcoal in the ground almost all over the island. This can't be explained by any kind of campfire for domestic purposes. It looks more like either some kind of sacrifice that is not quite clear or just a simple utilization. The islanders did not realize that by destroying the forest for arable land, that they were upsetting the ecological balance. Sooner or later, without a barrier like the forest, the rains would wash the fertile soil into the ocean. That's exactly what happened. The Rapa Nui cut down the forest for the fields, leaving them with no forest and fields. And therein lies the reason why the Rapa Nui stopped making statues. It could be a combination of factors. Over time, it became too resource-intensive, besides years of feuds that became more and more heated as they fought over dwindling resources, and the emergence of new cults. Desperate natives seemed to hope that the new gods would be better than the old ones. Be that as it may, the roots of the decline of the Easter Island civilization are inexorably rooted in ecology. There are different versions of the exact moment when the islanders passed the point of no return on the way to the ecological catastrophe that crushed civilization. Precise data is essential for science, but something else is crucial to our understanding. Easter Island is often compared to a separate planet. It's very remote and isolated from the rest of the world. And yet, even in such isolation, people created something remarkable here. Massive stone figures, precise alignments, and complex symbolics. Thousands of years earlier, on the other side of the world, another isolated group did something just as extraordinary. 12,000 years ago, people were struggling to survive. Although some cultures had already adapted to a sedentary way of life, many were still constantly busy hunting, gathering, and searching for a safe place to sleep. They didn't think about the future. They didn't change the world. But one day, everything changed. They built something unthinkable for that time, and then they hid it. Today, this place is opened up to us again, by accident. Buried in secrets, it immediately raises questions. How? Why? And what for? The mystery of Göbekli Tepe. Southeastern Turkey, 6 miles from the ancient city of Urfa, a hill amidst the pastures. Local shepherds believe there's nothing remarkable here, just an ordinary piece of land for grazing flocks. But wait, right here, strange stone blocks protrude from the ground. This is Göbekli Tepe, which translates from Turkish as Potbelly Hill. A massive megalith structure over 10,000 years old. And do you know how it was discovered? Almost by chance. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt noticed these blocks while surveying the area. At first glance, they seemed like ordinary stones. They had been spotted back in 1963, but no one paid them any real attention. Yet, Schmidt sensed something more. Later, he admitted, "The moment I saw these stones, I realized if I walked away now, I would remain a fool. This place would never leave me." And he was right. It soon became clear. Göbekli Tepe was not just a random find. This complex predates any known temple or most other ancient structures. But how? Think about it. 10,000 years ago, humans were hunter-gatherers. They had no cities, no writing. They hadn't even invented the wheel yet. They barely knew how to survive, let alone build something so monumental. Now imagine giant stone pillars, each weighing 10 to 20 tons, standing in perfect circles and adorned with carvings. Everything was crafted as if these people had a clear plan, excellent tools, and advanced engineering knowledge. How is that possible? Göbekli Tepe contradicts everything we know about the development of civilization. It completely changes our understanding of history. How did people with the most primitive tools manage to build such an astonishingly massive structure? And why? The age of Göbekli Tepe was determined using radiocarbon dating, the most accurate method for dating organic materials. Here's what researchers discovered. This complex was built around 9600 BC. This means the site is nearly 12,000 years old. It predates the Egyptian pyramids by 6,000 years, and Stonehenge by about 8,000 years. But wait, what do we know about that time? It was an extremely harsh era. The world was just beginning to recover from the Ice Age, and the climate conditions were, frankly, far from ideal. According to conventional archaeology, people at that time lived exclusively as nomads, gathering wild plants and hunting animals. They had very basic tools, primarily sharp stone pieces. Back then, agriculture and a settled way of life were out of the question. At best, people lived in shelters made of branches and bones, or in caves. The people of that time didn't construct massive stone structures. They lacked the knowledge, tools, and experience required for such monumental projects. All of these came later with the advent of agriculture. And yet, there it stood. Even a single glance at the columns of Göbekli Tepe is enough to make one question everything. Just think about it. Hunter-gatherers who hadn't even mastered agriculture suddenly produced something so sophisticated and large-scale. Where did they get such knowledge? It's not just their astonishing engineering skills that are remarkable, and you'll soon understand why. The complex consists of 4 enormous circular structures, with their diameters ranging from 32 to 100 feet. Every circle is surrounded by walls constructed from small limestone stones. Massive T-shaped pillars stand inside these circles. The 2 largest columns in the center are 16 to 20 feet tall and weigh up to 20 tons each, with smaller ones standing along the perimeter. These walls are not merely decorative. They enclose the space, turning each circle into an isolated sanctuary. The total area of the complex spans 8 hectares, or 20 acres. Soil scans reveal that there are 16 more circles underground. At every enclosure, a number of 12 megalith pillars can be expected. So in total, one can count more than 200 pillars. The arrangement of these circles is far from random. According to some hypotheses, they are specifically aligned with the rising point of Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. This suggests that the hunter-gatherers who built Göbekli Tepe tracked the movements of celestial bodies, calculated their appearances, and attached great importance to them. As the position of the star in the sky changed over the years, the builders erected new circles oriented towards the new rising point. They continued this practice for 1,500 years. Yes, Göbekli Tepe was a construction project of the millennium. Imagine humanity working on a single structure from the year 500 AD to the present day. It's hard to wrap your mind around this, isn't it? Many ancient structures across various cultures were later built following the same principle, aligned with Sirius, the brightest star. But those structures were created much later by civilizations we already know about, not 12,000 years ago, by a society that only knew how to hunt animals and gather edible plants. And yet, there it stood. Basic skills were clearly not enough to build something as grand as Göbekli Tepe. It required the knowledge of astronomy to align the structures with the stars, and mathematics to calculate dimensions and proportions. But even more astounding is the scale of the construction. It suggests an incredible labor organization. Countless people had to work together, each performing strictly defined tasks. Such coordination is only possible in a society with clearly distributed roles. It's traditionally believed that hunter-gatherers neither possessed the knowledge nor such organization. All this came much later, and yet, there it stood. But this isn't the only detail that suggests there's more we don't know about our ancestors. Massive multi-ton blocks stand inside the circles. Their surfaces astonishingly smooth, as if they were created by modern craftsmen with state-of-the-art equipment. The minimum weight of the columns along the walls of the circles is approximately 6 to 10 tons. Even assuming that hunter-gatherers had some knowledge 12,000 years ago, how could they possibly have managed such enormous stone blocks without cranes? Let's recall Stonehenge. It was built by agricultural societies that had already been familiar with techniques for processing and transporting materials for thousands of years. And then there's the Great Pyramid of Giza, composed of over 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing more than 2.5 tons. It was built by the most advanced civilization of its time, thousands of years later. But as we know, the architects of Göbekli Tepe were not farmers, but hunter-gatherers who did not possess advanced knowledge. They had only simple tools like flint chisels, hammers, and cutting tools. Traces of these tools have been found on the surfaces of the columns, which are surprisingly smooth. The builders manually carved all the reliefs and leveled the surfaces of the blocks using rudimentary tools, inch by inch, year after year. How were the building blocks for the columns transported here? There is still no definitive answer. Yes, limestone quarries were located near Göbekli Tepe, but that hardly made the task easier. Some researchers suggest the blocks were rolled on wooden logs. Another theory proposes that the ancient people had already developed a complex system of ropes and levers. To erect the columns, they likely built earthen ramps, which allowed them to lift and position the blocks on top of each other. This technique was later used in the construction of other ancient structures, such as Stonehenge. Yet, in the case of Göbekli Tepe, it remains unclear how these ancient builders managed to precisely position and align the multi-ton columns without a single crane. And yet, there it stood. There's something very peculiar about these stone pillars. They feature strange carvings depicting individual animals, and in some cases, entire scenes. The T-shaped pillars themselves most likely symbolized humans or gods. The top part of the pillar represents the head, and the lower part the torso. This theory is supported by the fact that some blocks, such as pillar number 18, clearly display carvings of hands and fingers. It all seems as though it was made by quite modern craftsmen, using quite modern tools. Now, take a closer look at pillar number 10, featuring a fox figure over 3.5 feet tall. How remarkable is this 12,000-year-old creation? Then there's pillar number 12, which depicts geese and a boar, and the relief of a predator, likely a felid hunting a boar, on pillar number 27. Amazing animal statues have also been found at the site. Here are, for instance, some boar-shaped sculptures. And here we see a head of an animal. But the builders of Göbekli Tepe did not only depict animals. Among the discoveries was a limestone head, clearly showing human facial features. This might be one of the earliest known life-sized sculptures of a human head. Another similar find is a sculpture of a human figure with hands clasped on the stomach. One more intriguing detail about the complex is its polished limestone floor, reminiscent of modern terrazzo. This technique was used thousands of years later in ancient Rome. Let us remind you one more time, all this artistry is over 10,000 years old. It was created before the advent of writing, and yet there it stood. Speaking of which, some researchers speculate that writing itself may have originated here. Yes, you heard that right. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe feature symbols that could represent the first words in the history of civilization. For instance, on pillar 18, there is a symbol resembling the letter H between two semicircles. This symbol is almost identical to a Luwian hieroglyphic from the Bronze Age that represented God. A number of archaeologists suggest that these signs might have had a sacred meaning. They might have symbolized a transition between worlds, or been early attempts to record abstract concepts such as a deity or the afterlife. What's even more astonishing is that the most intricate carvings are found on the oldest pillars. It seems as though ancient people experienced a sudden surge of knowledge and erected the first circle. But then the builders' relentless energy seemed to dwindle. The scale of construction gradually diminished, and the carvings became increasingly simple. It's as if people lost some of the knowledge their predecessors had. It seems everything should have been the other way around. However, one thing is certain. For the hunter-gatherers, Göbekli Tepe was a place of extraordinary importance. But why did they build it? Could this complex be the result of knowledge that was passed on to them? The first idea that comes to mind is that Göbekli Tepe might have been an ancient observatory. We've already mentioned that the four circular structures are aligned with the rising point of Sirius, and as this star shifted, new circles were constructed. This theory seems to make a lot of sense. However, Klaus Schmidt, who was in charge of the excavations, believed otherwise. In his opinion, Göbekli Tepe was the first temple, a place for rituals and religious ceremonies. This turned the conventional understanding on its head. Organized religion did not arise because of agriculture. In fact, it was the other way around. Argued that the desire to gather here for rituals pushed people towards a sedentary lifestyle and the development of farming. The spiritual significance is also suggested by the columns of the complex, covered with animal figures. These carvings may have represented totems symbolizing the power and dangers of the surrounding world, or served as protective charms. Even more mysterious are the depictions of vultures next to beheaded bodies. These scenes may have symbolized the soul's journey to the afterlife. Other findings also point to the sacred nature of this place. For example, Stone basins with traces of grain suggest they might have been used to brew beer, which played a key role in rituals. Perhaps these traces also suggest that agriculture may have originated here. But if this site was so important, why was it suddenly buried? What were these people trying to preserve or hide? We already know that back then, it required an extraordinary effort to construct this complex. And now it turns out it was deliberately buried? Klaus Schmidt first proposed this hypothesis. In his view, Göbekli Tepe was symbolically sealed by its creators. This act might have been their final ritual. It's as though they completed their mission here, buried their sacred site, and abandoned it forever. Or perhaps they wished to preserve it for future generations. However, not everyone agrees with these theories. Some scientific evidence points to natural causes that might have buried the site, such as erosion, landslides, and climate changes, which would be plausible for a structure located on such a hill. Still, many consider Göbekli Tepe a kind of time capsule, a message for future generations. But the question remains, who could have left such a warning? Naturally, this leads to an obvious theory. Could Göbekli Tepe have been built with the help of an unknown civilization? The sheer scale of this construction certainly fuels the boldest hypotheses. Some researchers believe that during the Ice Age, there was another, more advanced civilization that managed to pass on knowledge of engineering, astronomy, and mathematics to a group of hunter-gatherers. According to this theory, the structure itself is a kind of time capsule with a prophecy. But what were the builders of Göbekli Tepe trying to warn us about? It seems we might have access to this prophecy. One can find it on Pillar 43, also known as the Vulture Stone. The pillar features strange symbols, stars, lines, and images of animals. And here's the most surprising part. Some researchers suggest that this might be a calendar, but not the kind we are accustomed to. The stone clearly displays an image of a scorpion, which, according to some theories, represents the constellation Scorpius. At the center of the composition, there is a prominent circle, likely symbolizing the sun. Other carvings on the stone also correspond to constellations. Researchers have determined the period in history when these constellations might have appeared in the sky in the same arrangement depicted on the pillar. It turned out that this star configuration could have been observed from Göbekli Tepe only within a narrow time window, between 10,900 and 10,800 BC, approximately 13,000 years ago. But here's the kicker. This is 1,000 years older than the complex itself. Most likely, this carving recorded something very important: the end of the last ice age and a sharp climate shift known as the Younger Dryas. One hypothesis suggests that this abrupt warming triggered global catastrophes, which left very few survivors. Another theory is even more dramatic. This could mark the date of a comet impact that caused these changes. If so, the stone serves as a warning, a message for those who would live after. Something like, beware, this could happen again. And yes, it sounds even cooler than the Mayan calendar. But all of this remains just a hypothesis. Like a lot of things about Göbekli Tepe, we still don't know who built it, why, or how they did it. Moreover, only 5% of the complex has been excavated. The remaining 95% is still buried underground, guarding its secrets. But even the structures already unearthed raise countless questions. Why did hunter-gatherers, who had neither cities nor writing, build such a monumental complex? How did they achieve such engineering precision? And why did they bury it, as if sending a message through millennia? A temple, an observatory, a memorial, or a warning? What is it really? Every answer only brings more questions. Perhaps beneath the layers of Earth lie answers that could revolutionize our understanding of the past. Or perhaps we'll find their secrets that will once again overturn our perception of the world. But for now, we return to the ocean, where another equally strange mystery awaits. No, it's not buried. It's just hidden in plain sight, surrounded by tides. Deep in the heart of the Pacific Ocean lies a once glorious ancient city, shrouded in mystery and enigma. Its secrets have puzzled historians and archaeologists for centuries. The beauty of its architecture is a testament to the skills and creativity of a people whose identity is lost to the ages. Nobody knows who built this place. Nobody knows its exact purpose. Nobody knows how it was possible to move these gigantic stones without any modern technology. And yet, here it is, still standing. Secretive, mesmerizing, and abandoned. In this video, we are going to finally uncover the mysteries of this incredible place. The secrets of Nan Madol, the eighth wonder of the world. The ancient city of Nan Madol is located adjacent to the eastern shore of the island of Pohnpei in Micronesia. Of course, the indigenous people of the island have known about this place for many centuries. However, the ruins were first documented by European explorers and missionaries only in the 19th century. The name of the place, Nan Madol, translates as within the intervals, referring to the canals that crisscross the ruins. Since Nan Madol was built on a coral foundation, it is sometimes called the Venice of the Pacific. Just like Venice, the islands of Nan Madol are connected by a network of tidal channels and waterways. The construction of Nan Madol was an extremely ambitious undertaking, considering when it was actually taking place. According to the latest research data, the building of the site started in 1180 to 1200 AD by Pohnpeians. It's made of 92 artificial islets constructed from millions of stone blocks that have been placed in a lagoon. The core of this site with its stone walls is roughly 0.9 miles in length and 0.3 miles in width. Some of the structures reach as high as 52 feet. The islets were connected by canals and walls. They were constructed of basalt columns, which formed the foundation and walls of the islets. As you can see, the construction of Nan Madol is truly a marvel of engineering and architecture. However, it puzzled researchers and historians for centuries. Some of the stones used in the construction weighed up to 50 tons. How were they transported back then, without any modern technology? The stones that were used to construct the site apparently were moved from a volcanic quarry about 20 miles away from the site. Just imagine, ancient Pohnpei had a population of fewer than 30,000 people. Those basalt and coral rock structures were built approximately between the 12th and 16th centuries, with a total weight estimated to be 750,000 metric tons. That means that the people of Pohnpei moved on average 1,850 tons of basalt every year for 4 centuries. Just for comparison, 2 cargo ships weigh approximately 2,000 tons. How did they succeed in the transportation of these huge stones? The exact method is still uncertain. According to the most popular scientific theory, stones were likely moved from the mainland to the island via bamboo rafts. However, in 1995, when the Discovery Channel was making a documentary, any attempts to move the stones in this way were unsuccessful. Considering that, It's not surprising that locals still believe that the ancient builders used magic. According to them, a powerful magician used sounds of varying pitch to make basalt stones fly through the air like birds and settle in their spots. Another legend tells us about the giants who were able to move those huge rocks. Of course, for us, this all sounds like some kind of old fairy tale. Although many things about this place are covered in mysteries and secrets that are yet to be discovered. As scientists note, this kind of construction, just like the pyramids, didn't help anyone with anything. It didn't help society be fairer, or to grow crops, or provide any social good. So what could be the possible reason for constructing a city on a small island with coral reefs that only soar 5 feet above the surface of the water? Why did they build it? Some researchers in the past suggested that Nan Madol is an ancient weather manipulation technology, due to the distinctive magnetism of the basalt and the design of the site. The magnetism of the basalt, which is produced by piezoelectricity from the regular seismic activity of the island, causes a coronal discharge. This makes it possible for the Nan Madol complex to interact with the electromagnetic elements of a storm and dissipate it. However, there is no concrete evidence to suggest that this was actually the case. Modern researchers deny this theory. The main version is that Nan Madol was built to serve as a ceremonial and political center by the Saudeleur dynasty, which ruled over the island of Pohnpei from the 11th century until 1628. The Saudeleurs were originally benevolent leaders, but eventually became despotic. During their reign, the people of Pohnpei continued constructing the Nan Madol for many centuries. This period of history is referred to as the Mohin Saudeleur, or the time of the Lord of Delure. According to this version, the city of Nan Madol was built by the Saudeleur dynasty for a variety of reasons. It was intended to be a spiritual and cultural center, a symbol of their influence in the region. Finally, it was meant to be a place of trade and commerce. Artifacts found at Nan Madol support this theory. Archaeologists found stone and shell tools, necklaces, arm rings, trolling lure ornaments, drilled porpoise, quartz crystals, lancet and disc-shaped bead necklaces, and pottery. Also, there are large pounders used to process the root of the kava plant in a ceremonial drink. These findings are strong evidence of Nan Madol's significance as the ceremonial center of Eastern Micronesia. The Nan Madol complex is believed to have housed up to 1,000 people. Most of them were priests. It's also important to mention that the complex didn't have any source of food or drinking water. Most probably, it was brought from the mainland by the servants. Eventually, the Saudeleur dynasty was ended by the cultural hero Iso-Kellikel, who defeated the last Saudeleur in a great battle and established a decentralized system of government. However, there are more versions of who built this amazing site. The complexity of Nan Madol has brought up many speculations that the city was actually built by an extraterrestrial civilization. Proponents of this theory point to the limited scientific knowledge of the inhabitants of the region, who could not have engineered such an ambitious project. Additionally, archaeological evidence indicates that the city was once surrounded by a massive wall. And that's something that would have been incredibly difficult to construct without the aid of an advanced civilization. Of course, this theory is mostly considered as a fantasy. But the mysteries of Nan Madol don't end here. This ancient city was eventually abandoned and left to crumble in the tropical climate. What exactly made them leave this place? And the exact reasons for that are still unknown. The main theory suggests that the city was abandoned because of political unrest. As we already mentioned, The Saudeleur dynasty, which was believed to build this city, was overthrown in 1628 by Namuarkes. At first, they resided at Nan Madol, but had to grow their own food and gather water. Historians believe that this was one of the main factors in the eventual abandonment of Nan Madol. Other theories suggest that the city was abandoned due to a series of natural disasters. The area was constantly hit by a series of tsunamis, floods, and volcanic eruptions, which likely caused a lot of damage to the city. This would have made it difficult to maintain and repair the walls and canals, and it may have eventually become uninhabitable. There's evidence that sacred ceremonies continued until the end of the 1800s. However, it's hard to prove since no written records of the island's history exist. It has been kept alive only by oral tradition. The local practice of keeping secrets is a sacred law. This was one of the obstacles to learning more about the history of Nan Madol. Unfortunately, not a lot of artifacts from Nan Madol still remain to study. In 1874, a shipwreck near the Marshall Islands took numerous crates belonging to Polish anthropologist Jan Kubariewicz. These objects contained much of the island's history, and that's just one of the accidents that made many locals and researchers believe that the place is actually cursed. The curse is believed to be cast upon those who violate the lands. Well, at least that's how things are according to legends. The locals tell the following story to hesitant foreigners. In the 20th century, Germans governed the island when Governor Victor Berg entered the sealed tomb on the island and opened the coffin of the ancient island rulers. According to legend, he discovered the skeletal remains of giants, ranging from 6'6" to 10 feet tall. That night, a wild storm happened. Torrential rains pounded down on the island as Governor Victor Berg lay in delirium, hearing the sounds of a conch shell blowing. The next morning, Governor Berg died. The German physician serving on the island that night could not determine the cause of death, but the natives were certain that his death was a curse from the gods for his blatant disrespect. Today, historians suggest that the governor died as a result of sunstroke and heat exhaustion. But local people still believe that the curse is here and do not recommend anyone to stay on the island overnight. Despite everything, Nan Madol attracts more and more people every year. It became more popular after its inclusion in the UNESCO World Heritage Site list in 2016. Unfortunately, siltation of the waterways is allowing an overgrowth by mangroves, threatening the walls of the structures. Some parts of Nan Madol have crumbled over the last 200 years, with occasional typhoons blowing fragments into the sea. Nowadays, the site is open to tourists. Everyone can enter the place and see with their own eyes this ancient site. Even covered in green, the beauty of Nan Madol is undeniable. The locals hold hope that eventually UNESCO will provide funds to help restore the place. Given the history of Nan Madol, it definitely deserves to become a popular touristic site. After all, it's not called the 8th wonder of the world for nothing. But what about one of the 7 wonders of the world we know by name, yet have never truly seen with our own eyes? It once lit up the sea, before the sea took it. Imagine, you're a sailor in the ancient world. You've been at sea for several weeks already. You are extremely tired and look forward to getting back to Alexandria, your home. You're on deck, keeping watch and looking for the lights, but you can't see anything. The sea is dark. The sky is overcast. You're worried. And just when you're about to give up, you see a light in the distance. It's really small, but it's growing. Slowly, but steadily. You feel a surge of relief. You're almost there. You steer your ship towards the light. As you get closer, you can see the outline of the city. Here it is, the giant, magnificent Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the wonders of the world. The light from it is so bright that it illuminates the entire harbor. Finally, you're home. And that's what the Lighthouse of Alexandria is to sailors, a symbol of hope and home. Well, it was before it was completely destroyed. Sadly for us, the lighthouse didn't pass the test of time. For many centuries, even its physical appearance remained shrouded in mystery. The paintings and descriptions were extremely conflicting. Everything about the lighthouse was covered in mystery. It felt like everyone who has seen it with their own eyes saw it differently. It felt like we'd never be able to know the truth. But don't get ready to give up yet. The recent advancements in technology and modeling techniques have sparked a glimmer of hope for us. Scholars, historians, and archaeologists have embarked on a quest to uncover the secrets of this legendary lighthouse and learn the truth about its appearance. Moreover, some of them took over an almost impossible task: the digital recreation of the lighthouse. But can they actually recreate something that so many scientists struggled with for hundreds and hundreds of years? And how accurate is it going to be? In this video, we will take a journey together to ancient times, try to rebuild together the pharaohs of Alexandria and its real shape, and learn everything about its history. Get ready to uncover with us the secrets of one of the lost wonders of the world. Lost and found wonder of the world, the Alexandria Lighthouse. First, let's dive into a bit of the history of the lighthouse and understand why it's actually in the extremely exclusive list of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, in one line with the pyramids and hanging gardens of Babylon. Well, to be honest, it wasn't just another lighthouse. First of all, let's get our minds around the fact that it was built in 280 BC. And for that time, the Alexandria Lighthouse, also known as the Pharos, was a crazy structure, something never seen before. Some historians claim that the light from it could be seen from up to 50 kilometers away. But it wasn't just a lighthouse. It was the jewel of the most impressive and beautiful city of that time, Alexandria, built by Alexander the Great. According to historical evidence, the lighthouse was around 135 meters tall. That's how tall modern 35-story buildings are. Not impressed? Let me remind you once again when it was built: 280 before Christ, before all the modern and not-so-modern technologies. At the time of construction, it was the second tallest man-made structure in existence, apart from the pyramids of Giza. There's no exact information on how many people were working on it. Approximately, it took around 20 years to construct it on the tiny island of Pharos in the harbor of Alexandria. This is, again, extremely impressive if we take into account the circumstances. This extraordinary structure cost a staggering 800 bars of silver at the time, equivalent to around $3 million in today's currency. The lighthouse was not merely a functional structure. It held a symbolic purpose. It was envisioned as a testament to the enduring power of Alexandria. As one of the tallest structures in the ancient world, the lighthouse served as both a guiding light and a magnificent display of human achievement. Contrary to popular belief, this iconic structure may not have always been a lighthouse. The earliest accounts of Pharos do not mention anything about a guiding light. However, it is believed that at a certain stage, a light was indeed added to the pinnacle of the lighthouse. Most likely was fueled by oil. But it wasn't until the 1st century CE that the earliest references to the luminous flame emerged. And another revelation will leave you awestruck. It is believed that the pinnacle of this architectural marvel housed a telescope. According to geographer Ibn Khordadbeh, through its lens, one could gaze upon the distant city of Constantinople, which, by the way, lies in the distance of more than 1,000 kilometers from Alexandria. Without a doubt, this lighthouse was one of the most impressive ancient buildings. But, as you've already guessed, we are not lucky enough to see it with our own eyes. The building was standing for more than 1,500 years, being the beacon of hope for sailors, and, well, just candy to the eye. Throughout its existence, this architectural marvel stood tall, defying earthquakes that threatened its very existence. However, it couldn't stand until modern days. History tells us that the first earthquake to shake the foundations of the lighthouse occurred in 796 CE. Its devastating power left only the first level standing, a mere remnant of its former glory. But the relentless quakes continued to test the lighthouse's fortitude. In the years 950 and 955, the earth trembled once more, claiming parts of the towering structure. Then, in 1375, an earthquake delivered the final blow, reducing the lighthouse to nothing more than a pile of rubble. In a twist of fate, the remaining stones of the lighthouse found a new purpose. Between 1477 and 1479, it is believed that Sultan Al-Ashraf Saif used them to construct the awe-inspiring Kite Bay Fort on Pharos, also known as the Citadel of Kite Bay. This formidable fortress, guarding the coast against the looming Ottoman threat, emerged from the remnants of a once great beacon. And then, for hundreds of years, this magnificent building was kind of forgotten. More than 6 centuries later, in the year 1916, French engineer Gaston Jondet embarked on an extraordinary archaeological expedition that would forever change our understanding of history. Jondet, delving into the depths of the submerged port at Pharos, made a groundbreaking discovery: the remnants of the Lighthouse of Alexandria. His work in the study of submerged port facilities marked a milestone in the field of archaeology, for it was the first time that such colossal underwater structures had been uncovered. Astonishingly, some of these remnants lay just beneath 9 meters of water, visible even to the naked eye. Over the years, Alexandria continued to reveal its ancient secrets. In 1933, Prince Omar Toussaint sponsored an expedition to retrieve a marble head of the great Alexander the Great, after a keen-eyed British Royal Air Force pilot noticed submerged ruins from above. Then, in 1961, an amateur archaeologist and skilled diver, Kamel Abu El Sadat, stumbled upon fragments of a towering sculpture exceeding 6 meters in height. The discovery prompted a UNESCO grant to further explore the seabed for additional archaeological marvels. Led by marine archaeologist Honor Frost, a team embarked on an inspiring journey to the site. Frost's meticulous research and exploration confirmed the existence of ruins. Unfortunately, due to the scarcity of specialized archaeologists and the region's transformation into a military zone, further exploration had to be postponed, leaving tantalizing questions unanswered. Hope was reignited in the mid-1990s when a team of French archaeologists, under the leadership of Jean-Yves Empereur, embarked on another remarkable mission to the site. In late 1994, Empereur's team rediscovered the physical remnants of the lighthouse lying on the floor of Alexandria's eastern harbor. Among the most significant were colossal blocks of granite weighing between 49 and 60 tons, often fragmented into multiple pieces. The team also uncovered 30 sphinxes, 5 obelisks, and columns adorned with carvings dating back to the era of Ramses II. In the process of documenting their findings, Empereur and his team completed the cataloging of over 3,300 individual pieces by the end of 1995. using a combination of photography and meticulous mapping. To showcase the beauty of their discoveries, they restored 36 granite blocks and various other artifacts which are now exhibited in museums across Alexandria. Further examination using satellite imaging techniques unveiled additional remnants of the ancient wonder. That's how nearly 600 years after the fall of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, grand ambitions have been set in motion to resurrect this seventh wonder of the world. Thanks to all this research, nowadays we might even do something that seemed impossible before. We are going to recreate the structure of this marvel. But how can we get an accurate reconstruction without any concrete data? Well, the sources agree on a few facts, and they can actually help us to rebuild it, at least virtually. Now, according to these facts, the lighthouse was crafted from light marble and mortar and had 3 levels. The first level was a solid rectangle, followed by an octagonal second level, and finally a cylindrical third level. And that's not all. As you may have noticed, it was crowned by a majestic statue at the top. This is an embodiment of either Zeus or Poseidon. At least that's how the ancient travelers pictured it. But can we trust them? Well, thanks to modern technologies, we can actually conduct some fact-checking. As most of the lighthouse ruins are now underwater, let's drain the ocean in the place where the ruins of the Alexandria Lighthouse remain, Alexandria Harbor. Ready to uncover one of the most mind-blowing ancient secrets? Now for that, we might need to drain the ocean. No worries, we'll just do it virtually. The water is slowly fading, and we can already see some blocks remaining on the ocean ground. This is one of the largest underwater archaeological sites in the world. Around 3,000 blocks are lying here, and they for sure have an untold history behind them. These stones are spread over 12,000 square meters of the seabed. We can tell that those remains are not the work of nature. They are for sure made by humans. Those giant blocks are the remains of a once spectacular and tall building, the Alexandria Lighthouse. And some of these man-made stones are the key to the structure and shape of this ancient masterpiece. Some of those blocks formed cornerstones of the lighthouse. By studying those, it became obvious to the scientists that the walls were straight. That's the first actual physical proof of the ancient wonder's design. Now the hardest part is piecing together those 3,000 blocks to understand the structure of the building. It's not at all easy. And the fact that many crucial pieces were excavated and taken to museums is making the task even harder. But the scientists were able to do that. One of the huge discoveries lies on the quay side, and it's actually a very important piece, the side part of the door frame. Now, on the scanned images of the seabed, we can see some huge blocks. Combining them with previously discovered stones, we can recreate the door of the lighthouse, one of its crucial parts. Now, using computer technology, we are reversing the time. These pieces came together perfectly. And here it is, the first time when a part of the Pharos was accurately recreated. The granite door frame with the wooden door. Its height is around 12 meters, with a weight of around 200 tons. But is that all we can do? What about the other parts of the lighthouse? Will it always remain a mystery for us? Well, actually, the reconstruction of the door frame led to other discoveries. The outside edge of it reveals information about the thickness of the outside wall of the building. It's 2 meters. Now, this information gives us the opportunity to decipher some historical texts which describe the lighthouse. Comparing the 3D data and historical evidence, it actually becomes possible to solve the puzzle. Using computer technologies, it's possible now to reconstruct the building in the most accurate way ever. And here it is. in its full glory, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the highest ancient buildings, and now we know for sure how it looked. It was really as high as a modern 35-story building. It really consisted of 3 levels, and it was really, truly, without a single doubt, a masterpiece. And today, we were able to uncover its secrets and see it for the first time in the most accurate shape ever. But how many mysteries are there in the land of the ancient Egyptian civilization? It's hard to even count them. Perhaps one day we will finally know the answer to the question of how the pyramids were built and by who exactly. Until then, we can once again take a look at the wonder that has already been just recreated in front of our eyes and wait for the day when we uncover even more of the mysteries of this ancient land. But while ancient Egypt left behind stone monuments, there's another tale of a lost world, one built from words, myths, and deep mysteries. The precise location of this place remains a mystery. Plato mentioned that it was beyond the Duchy of Gadara and situated between Africa and America. Legend has it the place vanished suddenly, swallowed by the ocean as a result of some disaster or the wrath of the gods. This is the mythical Atlantis. With some rare exceptions, Atlantis has always been sought in the Atlantic Ocean or along its shores, but it's yet to be found. After all, it is mythical for a reason. However, in 1986, an accidental discovery off the coast of Japan stirred the minds of seekers. Many wondered if perhaps we've been searching in the wrong place for centuries. A structure resembling a pyramid with tunnels, stairs, terraces, and covering an area of several football fields shocks us with its clearly artificial forms. However, the depth prevented detailed mapping of the site at the time. If only we could drain the ocean for a short time. Fast forward nearly 40 years, and thanks to advances in scanning and visualization technology, we can now do just that. Today, we'll see incredibly detailed and realistic images of what could be seen if we drained the ocean at this mysterious place. And when the water recedes, we'll be privy to views that scuba divers could only dream of. Could Yonaguni Monument be the lost Atlantis? Yonaguni Island marks the westernmost and southernmost point of Japan. Large schools of hammerhead sharks gather here in February and March, attracting divers from all over the world. In 1986, Kihachiro Aratake, a professional diver and head of the Yonaguni Island Tourist Association, stumbled upon something very strange during one of his dives. A monument comprised of a system of geometrically precise terraces and elevations transitioning into one another. This led the diver to believe that the monument was man-made. He shared the discovery with the public, and immediately the media was filled with sensational headlines. The tiny Yonaguni Island quickly became a magnet not only for divers, but also journalists, science pop writers of varying credibility, and even renowned scientists. There ensued a heated debate. Was this merely an exotic natural formation, or indeed a man-made structure whose origin and purpose remain unknown? What was so special about this place? Why did it fascinate so many people? Pretty soon, you'll find out the answers. Over these several decades, there were a few serious expeditions to the Yonaguni Monument, trying to find compelling evidence in favor of either the natural or man-made theory. And they indeed found something. However, before we examine the evidence, artifacts, or conclusions, let's take a moment to appreciate our advanced technology and look at this massive object as it would appear if the water was completely gone. Yep, we are about to drain the ocean now and see what lies at the bottom. So, we've raised the gates of our imaginary dam, and the water is now quickly going away. Almost immediately, The top of the mysterious structure emerges as it lies only a few meters below the waterline. The water continues to recede quickly, revealing new levels of terraces to us. They emerge sharply, as if jumping out of the water, suggesting that they are very level and seem to be intentionally designed that way. As the water retreats, it reveals even more amazing details before our eyes. Now we see step formations that can only be called stairs. At the same time, stone objects adjacent to the main structure surface from the water. As the receding water reaches the bottom, it exposes cavities in the walls that distinctly resemble entrances to labyrinths, even entire gates or a ceremonial entrance to this whimsical castle. And when the bottom is exposed, a majestic creation of unknown forces stands before us in all its magnificence. Only once we get rid of the water can we fully grasp how huge and unusual this object is. The central structure of the monument is about 43 meters high. One of the sides is 183 meters long, the second 150 meters. In close proximity, there are objects with similar designs but smaller scales, reaching about 10 meters high. Finally, we can examine this entire architectural ensemble in detail and revise the conclusions of scientists and enthusiasts about the origin of this remarkable place. The most convinced advocate for the artificial origin of the Yonaguni Monument was Masaaki Kimura, a professor at the University of Ryukyu. The object directly aligns with his scientific interests, as Kimura specializes in marine geology and seismology. Over 10 years of research and underwater dives in search of new facts and evidence, he repeatedly asserted the artificial creation of the monument in academic circles, even putting his name and reputation on the line. After all, he had to cooperate with Graham Hancock. He is a well-known British writer and journalist, the author of over a dozen books and 2 documentaries where he proposes an alternative view on historical mysteries, searches for unknown ancient civilizations, and explores cultural heritage around the world. In academic circles, Hancock's methods are often labeled pseudoscientific. However, he involved a real scientist in his research, Robert Schoch, who made a significant contribution to unraveling the mysteries of the Yonaguni Monument. We'll soon introduce Robert Schoch into our story. Hancock proposed an interesting idea regarding the Yonaguni Monument. The tilt of the Earth's axis is 23 degrees 27 feet. Accordingly, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn also lie at 23 degrees 27 feet north and south of the equator respectively. But it wasn't always the case. It's well established that the tilt of the axis periodically changes from about 22 degrees to 24 degrees over tens of thousands of years. And 10,000 years ago, it could well have been exactly 1 degree more than today. 24 degrees 27 feet. At least there is no direct scientific evidence to refute this. Do you know what this means for us? This is the exact latitude where the small island of Yonaguni is located, making this twice as interesting. Hancock concludes that the discovered monuments are sanctuaries built on the Tropic of Cancer. This means the mythical civilization that constructed the monument not only possessed decent terraforming skills, but also had certain astronomical knowledge to create astronomically oriented objects. Of course, this could be just a coincidence. Well then, what arguments does Professor Kimura present? They are all right before us. The monument's shape resembles a pyramid or a castle. The monument has many small steps, about 20 centimeters high. They could have been used as a staircase, whose shape just disarmingly resembles flights of stairs. Some elements of the monument could hardly have been formed by waves and water movement. The monument is bordered by something like a road, nearly devoid of rock fragments, which also testifies against the action of natural forces. The road is surrounded by a stone wall. the professor points out other interesting features. In the lower part, we see something clearly resembling a grand abandoned castle entrance. And indeed, a tunnel leads into the monument. At its end, the path opens up to a staircase. Also, here we see protrusions resembling peculiarly shaped mounds, remarkably reminiscent of a turtle. Moreover, at the top of the monument, we see a strange triangular recess. Its nature and purpose were entirely unclear until we drained the ocean. As soon as the water receded, this place immediately became very similar to an exotic pool, perhaps a relaxation spot for members of an unknown civilization. But despite all these clear indicators of an artificial origin, we needed the most convincing evidence, traces of the monument's creators themselves. And indeed, scientists did discover something. During one of the expeditions, researchers found a few artifacts, stones drilled with symbols, primitive scrapers, and even something resembling drawings of a certain animal resembling a bull. So this was the time for the advocates to get excited because the traces of the monument's creators had finally been found. However, this is exactly where the disappointments began. Firstly, the findings were quite scarce. Secondly, the research showed that these artifacts didn't belong to the mythical Lemurians, but to the local Ryukyu culture. And their age is no more than 2,000 to 5,000 years old. One of the expedition members was the aforementioned Robert Schoch, an adjunct professor of natural sciences at Boston University's College of General Studies. The researcher expressed his belief that Yonaguni is a natural structure. Schoch states that he found nothing man-made in it during the investigation. He notes that the entire stone structure is a monolith, not something built from blocks. Moreover, this mass consists of sandstone, a type of rock that tends to fracture along its planes. Hence the straight lines, sharp angles, surfaces resembling brickwork, and so on. But Schoch's arguments didn't end there. He continued, possibly not without regret, to refute the optimistic theory. The Japanese islands are a very seismically active region. Therefore, the significant crackability of the rock is not surprising, especially at angles of 90 and 60 degrees to each other, leading to the formation of strict geometric shapes, rectangular steps, triangles, and diamonds. However, he voiced the opinion that the monument could have been subsequently modified by humans. So how did Professor Kimura react to this criticism? For a long time, he staunchly held the belief that the monument is man-made. And here's why. Despite the similarity of Yonaguni's rocks, there are very pronounced differences between them. In a confined area, elements of completely different types end up very close to each other. For instance, a face with sharp edges, round holes, a stepped descent, and a perfectly straight narrow trench. If the cause was solely natural erosion, it would be logical to expect identical forms throughout the whole rock. The fact that such different elements are side by side strongly suggested their artificial origin. Nevertheless, even Kimura eventually admitted that the monument could not have been entirely built by humans. At the moment, he also supports the idea that nature created the initial form, which could have then been enhanced by humans. During scientific discussions, the term terraformed even gained a new meaning, which researchers used to describe the nature of the object. Originally, this term appeared in science fiction to denote changes that humans make to the landscape and climate of other planets. At present, not all the mysteries of Yonaguni have been unraveled. Some things still remain uncertain. In close proximity to the monument underwater, a cave with a series of stalactites has been discovered. Research using beryllium-10 indicated that their formation ceased at least 10,000 years ago. In other words, this is the time when the sea flooded this part of the land and the monument itself. After all, stalactites cannot form underwater. This dating fully coincides with the estimates of past changes in the global ocean level. Based on this, geologists estimate the monument's age to be between 10,000 to 16,000 years old. In this light, Graham Hancock's idea that Yonaguni was positioned exactly on the Tropic of Cancer at the time of its creation begins to seem more plausible. The Yonaguni Monument is almost certainly not a remnant of Atlantis. However, it's not ruled out that it is more than just an oddly shaped rock.